Welcome back to another video. My name's Daniel Schiffer, and it's been a minute since I've done a video like this, sitting in front of the camera, doing an editing tutorial / breakdown. A lot of people have been asking for this type of content ever since I started doing behind the scenes videos, because in those videos, I would have a tendency to show the before and after of my footage, but a very large amount of you have been asking, what does that actually look like for me to take a boring clip and turn it into something that looks kind of cool or interesting? Okay, welcome to the upstairs of my office. This right here is a TV speaker. This is my girlfriend's. I'm borrowing it as our subject for this little sample shot we're gonna get. If you were wondering, we're lighting this with the Lowell Ego LED. Now, something I noticed with our little TV display here is that if I'm using a shutter speed of 1/250, we do get this weird sort of rolling shutter flicker, which isn't ideal. It's not a huge deal, but if we can get rid of it and control it, it's definitely best to try and do so. What I've noticed is that if I turn my shutter speed up to 1/320, that pretty much solves the issue. We don't really have much of a flicker anymore, so that's what we're gonna go with. And now we're ready to get our basic little shot. So I'm gonna start here and simply rotate from right to left. One more time, from right to left. And I think that was pretty good, so let's fire it up on the computer and see how it goes. Welcome to Final Cut Pro 10. This is where I edit most of my videos. This is the shot we got yesterday, and as you can see, pretty boring, quick shot, and there's not really a whole lot to it. Please keep in mind that none of these things that we're about to do are particularly groundbreaking or gonna blow anyone's minds. This is all simple things that I do to my footage to just make it look a bit better. Now, because we shot this in 120 frames per second, the first thing I'm gonna do is slow this down. So I'm gonna click on it, hit Command R on my keyboard, and type in 20%, hit enter, and now we have a nice, slow clip. Now, naturally, when you slow a clip down to 20% of its original speed, this is automatically gonna make the shot a lot smoother, but I would like to get the clip as smooth as possible. So oftentimes what I do is I also go in and add some stabilization. Now, Final Cut does have two different types of stabilization already built into the software. There is inertia cam and smooth cam. I usually go with automatic because the program seems to do a pretty good job knowing what kind of stabilization your clip needs. Now, you could go in and adjust all these parameters here, but I usually just leave it as is. So now that our clip is slowed down and stabilized, it's looking very smooth. This is already quite a bit better from the raw clip that was just at regular speed, but now I'm gonna go in and tweak it out a bit, make it a little more interesting. I'm gonna select the clip, and in my scale here, this is where I'll be adding a zoom in effect. So I'm gonna hit keyframe on 100%. This means that we're starting our clip where the playhead is at 100% scale. Then I'll take my playhead and move it to the very end of the clip onto our very last frame, like so, and I will zoom in to about 140%. Now, by what percentage you choose to zoom in is totally up to you, and it will depend on your clip, how long it is, how slow it is, and just the effect you're going for. I find with this clip here, 140% zoom in looks pretty cool, but a lot of the time I might only do 105 or 110. It really just depends on the situation. Now, this is our shot with the zoom in added, and I think it definitely adds another dramatic element to the shot, but something that's really bothering me about this shot that happens quite often on a lot of my footage is that the horizon, the overall orientation of the clip as it goes on, ends up looking very crooked. I personally find it really satisfying when a clip has a perfect horizon all the way through, and that is why on pretty much every shot I get, if the horizon is crooked out of camera, I fix it in post. I'm gonna take my playhead here and move it back to the beginning of our clip, and then I'm going to set a keyframe on our rotation at 0 degrees. Now, the beginning of our clip already looks fairly even. We don't really have to fix it, so 0 degrees is totally fine, and we're gonna leave it like that where it is. But then we're gonna take our playhead and move it to the end frame, kind of like we did before with the scale, and now we're just gonna adjust our rotation until we have it looking nice and even. Sometimes it's hard to tell when your shot is even, so what I like to do is go up to view and bring up my horizon, and this will give us a much better indication of when our shot is level. So right away I can tell that at -7 degrees I've already over rotated this. I know this because the line here for the window looks crooked, and even this gumball machine looks a bit crooked. Everything just looks a bit off. So what I'm gonna do is adjust this until I think it looks natural to the eye. And I think we could go -4 or -5%. They both look pretty good, but I think for the sake of our purposes, I like the look of -5. And now if we play this shot through, you can see that we maintain a pretty level horizon throughout the whole clip. This is a lot more satisfying and gives a more professional look to a shot because it is very hard to accomplish something like this in camera, especially if you're shooting handheld. So like I said, that makes our clip a lot more satisfying, but I think we can make it even more satisfying by centering our subject. Again, I'm gonna take us back to our very first frame, and I'm going to set a keyframe on our position. Again, everything at the beginning of the shot looks good, so we're gonna leave our position at 0. Once again, I'll head over to the final frame of our shot where we have all of these keyframes, and we're gonna add another keyframe. I'm actually gonna bring back the horizon overlay because this is gonna help us to center our subject, and I'm gonna click here for our transforms, and I'm just gonna move this around until I feel like it's pretty centered. Now that looks pretty good to me, so I'm gonna leave it right there. And if we play this through, we'll notice that it looks pretty good, but there's this weird sort of lag in the movement where the display of the speaker kind of moves away from the center, then comes back. I want it to stay pretty close to the center throughout the whole shot, so there's 2 things we can do to fix this. Firstly, I'm gonna right click on our clip and I'm gonna hit show video animation. And if we go into our position here, I can set these keyframes to linear. What this does is it keeps the speed of our movement throughout the clip very even. So we're not gonna be faster in the middle, slower at the end. It's just gonna be even all the way through, which is what we want. And the last thing I'm gonna do to correct this issue is I'm gonna go to the point in the clip where our screen is a little off-centered. I think right here, I'm gonna add one more keyframe by clicking here and just recentering this one more time. Now keep in mind, if we bring this video animation window up one more time, our first and last keyframes are linear, but we're gonna leave this middle one as smooth. That's to make sure that we don't actually notice it stopping in the middle and then moving again. This will ease the whole movement throughout the clip, which is what we want. And now if we play this back, you can see we have a really nicely centered shot and we're not making any mistake that the speaker is in fact the subject and where our attention is going to be in this shot. I mean, just look what the original shot looked like and look at what it looks like now. It's a massive difference from these 3 little changes. But now I want to move along to really spicing up the appearance, the look of this shot. And to start that process, we're going to bring up our effects tab and we're going to color grade. So here I have a plugin called Color Finale Pro. You don't need to use Color Finale Pro. I'm not sponsored by them. This is just the workflow I'm used to. I'm going to open my controls and I'm going to add a LUT. Here's my LUT gallery. This is my Vintage Look 3 LUT pack, which you can check out in the link down below. As you can see, we have a few to choose from. A lot of them are very similar, but they have subtle differences. I'm gonna go with number 1 here, and then I'm gonna make a few more subtle changes to add to it. I always try and tell people that it's not a great habit to just slap LUTs on your footage and leave it as is, because most of the time, just a LUT preset alone isn't gonna elevate your footage because they're not designed specifically for your footage unless you made them yourself. I've created a color wheels layer that I'm gonna drag below our LUT layer and I'm gonna brighten it up. I'm also gonna add a whole bunch of saturation. I'm gonna create a curves layer and create some contrast, a vectors layer to shift some of our colors, and then maybe one more color wheels layer to kind of balance everything out. What I wanna do now is add some sharpening to our shot. And no, I'm not gonna be sharpening up the whole clip. I strongly urge you not to do that unless you're using noise reduction. What I am gonna do is sharpen up some of these little finer details to make them pop. So I'm gonna go in my effects here and type in sharpen, and we're gonna take our sharpen effect here and drag it onto our footage. Next, I'm gonna click on this little icon here, which creates a mask, and I'm gonna do a shape mask, and we're gonna put this around these little buttons on the front of our display. As we play around with the slider, you'll notice that we're adjusting the sharpness of the buttons and not much else. I think we're looking pretty good at around 4. So I'm just gonna type in 4 here, and I like the way that looks. Those buttons are really popping off the display, which is what we want, and I'm going to add a keyframe. The reason I'm adding a keyframe is because we have camera movement in the shot, and if we don't keyframe that mask, you'll see that as I scrub through this footage, our mask is no longer over the buttons, and we want to make sure that it is. So we've added our keyframe here. I'm going to go to the very end to our final frame, and I'm going to adjust the position of our mask like so. And then I'll go to a couple points in the middle of our shot and do the same thing. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. If we scrub through now, you'll see that our mask stays over our buttons and nothing else. So let's just punch in for a second here so we can get a little before and after of what the sharpening did. That's before. that's after. You can see that it kind of boosts that sharpness and that contrast on that specific part of our shot. This adds a little bit of depth and detail, makes the shot look a little bit more three-dimensional. Speaking of three-dimensional, here's another way to make your shot look even more 3D. I'm gonna open my effects tab once again, and this time I'm gonna type in prism, and we're gonna take this prism blur effect and add it to our footage. Obviously, this looks awful and we're not gonna keep it like this. We're gonna be using a very subtle prism blur effect only on the background of our clip. So what I'm gonna do is start with our mask, and I'm basically gonna repeat the exact same process that we did for our sharpening mask, but this time we're actually gonna click here and invert the mask. That way we're adding the prism to the background, but not actually to our subject. I'm gonna adjust the shape of this. I don't want the prism on the reflection much either. Add some feathering, and I'd say we're looking pretty good. Add a keyframe to our mask and skip ahead to the end of the shot, and we're just gonna make sure that our mask is still in a good position, and I'm pretty happy with that. But this is a way too aggressive prism blur on our background. I don't want it to be noticeable. I just want it to do enough to add a little bit of a 3D effect to our footage. So here I'm gonna take my playhead and move it to the beginning of our shot, the very first frame. Make sure our clip is selected, and I'm going to make the amount 2. I'll create a keyframe right there, and then I'll take our playhead once again, move it to the end of our clip on the final frame, and I'm gonna bump it up to 6. But have a look at what our clip looks like without the prism blur on the background or the sharpening on the buttons, and then here have a look at our clip with those two things added to the shot. Now these subtle little details end up making a massive difference to your shots, and the key word there is subtle. You do not want to overdo this stuff. Don't add too much sharpening, don't add too much of a prism to the background. It will just look goofy and amateur. Keep it subtle, keep it tasteful, and people will look at your footage and go, that looks pretty cool. So here is the raw footage we started with, slowed down to 20%. You could see it's a pretty basic shot, not much to it. And here is our final clip after all of our adjustments. Now, like I said at the beginning of the video, none of this stuff is groundbreaking. It's not gonna break the internet. People aren't gonna have their minds blown, but it does make your footage look a little bit better. It makes it slightly more interesting. If you have some boring shots with not a lot to it, why not spice it up a little and practice these techniques? But I do hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, don't forget to hit it with a like and subscribe. Follow me on Instagram at daniel.schiffer, and as always, I will see you guys in the next video.